When we think of the Roman Empire, we often imagine grand armies, majestic monuments, and emperors carved in marble. But what if I told you that behind the polished image of glory lived rulers with habits so revolting they warped the empire itself? What would you think if the man in charge of the greatest civilization on earth dined until he collapsed, or turned his palace into a theater of humiliation? History books like to praise Roman engineering and law, but how often do they mention the emperor who named his horse a consul, or the one who turned Rome into a playground for his twisted fantasies? Would you trust a leader who burned his own city, or another who hid away on an island to indulge in unspeakable pleasures? These are not side stories. They are the personal habits of men who sat at the center of power. Tonight, you'll discover emperors whose actions were so grotesque that they scarred Rome forever. From gluttony and cruelty to madness and obsession, their habits reveal the shocking human side of empire. So ask yourself, how much power is too much? And what happens when the man with it loses control? Few emperors in history embody pure madness quite like Caligula. Born Gaius Julius Caesar Germanicus, he rose to power in 37 AD after the death of Tiberius. At first, Romans welcomed him with open arms. He was young, charismatic, and carried the legacy of his famous family. But power revealed the darker corners of his soul, and what emerged was not the noble heir people hoped for, but a ruler whose grotesque habits would become legendary. Caligula's cruelty had no boundaries. He enjoyed humiliating senators, often forcing them to run beside his chariot like slaves. Executions were staged as public entertainment, and he relished watching others suffer. Yet cruelty was only part of his twisted persona. His personal life blurred the line between scandal and obscenity, with rumors of incest, debauchery, and late-night orgies that shocked even a city accustomed to excess. One of his strangest obsessions was his horse, Incitatus. Caligula lavished the animal with marble stables, jeweled collars, and servants. He even declared that Incitatus would serve as consul, a mockery of Rome's political institutions. Whether this was insanity, satire, or a cruel joke, it left senators humiliated and the empire in disbelief. Caligula also treated Rome's treasury like his personal wallet. He drained state finances on absurd spectacles, from golden feasts to artificial battles staged just to prove his power. These habits, both grotesque and theatrical, not only destabilized the empire but also set the stage for his downfall. By 41 AD, even his closest guards could no longer tolerate him. He was assassinated in a palace corridor, leaving behind a legacy that mixed terror with absurd comedy. If Caligula represented pure madness, Nero embodied theatrical excess. Ascending the throne at just 17 years old in 54 AD, he quickly revealed that Rome's greatest stage was not its arenas but the empire itself. Nero fancied himself not as a ruler, but as an artist, a singer, and even an actor. To him, the title of emperor was simply another costume to wear in his lifelong performance. His reign was marked by self-indulgence. Nero organized extravagant games and competitions, forcing senators and nobles to sit for hours as he sang and performed. Those who dared to leave before the show ended faced punishment, sometimes even death. Rome's most powerful men were reduced to unwilling spectators in the emperor's personal theater. But the defining rumor of Nero's rule was the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD. As flames consumed the city, whispers spread that Nero watched from his palace balcony, playing the lyre while Rome burned. Whether true or not, he certainly exploited the disaster, seizing land cleared by the fire to build his colossal golden house, a palace dripping with marble, fountains, and gold leaf ceilings. While ordinary Romans mourned their lost homes, Nero decorated his with unimaginable luxury. His cruelty was as grotesque as his artistic ambitions. He persecuted Christians, executing them in brutal spectacles that turned death into public entertainment. He also had his own mother killed, fearful of her influence, and eliminated rivals with ruthless efficiency. To Nero, family and citizens alike were expendable props in his grand production. Nero's habits, his hunger for applause, his grotesque cruelty, and his obsessive desire for glory warped Rome into his personal stage. But eventually, even the Senate grew tired of his performance. Declared a public enemy, Nero fled and ended his life in 68 AD, whispering the final haunting words, "What an artist dies in me." If watching Rome burn for entertainment seems insane, wait until you hear about Tiberius and his dark retreat in Capri. Tiberius, the stepson of Augustus, began his reign in 14 AD with the aura of a capable general and a man seasoned by military discipline. But as power weighed on him, he transformed from a promising leader into one of Rome's most withdrawn and repulsive rulers. Unlike Nero's flamboyant theatrics or Caligula's public madness, Tiberius preferred shadows, secrecy, silence, and a retreat from Rome that would fuel centuries of dark rumors. Disgusted by politics and suspicious of the Senate, Tiberius eventually abandoned Rome for the island of Capri. There, in palaces perched above the sea, he indulged in pleasures so obscene that even ancient writers hesitated to describe them. Suetonius and Tacitus whisper of endless orgies, swimming pools filled with young attendants, and acts of cruelty disguised as entertainment. Whether exaggerated or not, these tales cemented Tiberius's image as a man whose personal corruption mirrored his political paranoia. On Capri, fear ruled as much as desire. Those who displeased Tiberius vanished into exile or execution. Accusations of treason multiplied, and senators in Rome lived in constant terror of a letter from Capri ordering their deaths. For the emperor, cruelty became a pastime, and suspicion became policy. Rome was governed not from its marble halls, but from a fortress of fear built on an island retreat. What made Tiberius truly grotesque was not just his rumored lusts, but the way he combined them with political terror. Behind closed doors, indulgence reigned. In public, blood was spilled. It was a reign where Rome's emperor seemed more ghost than man, lurking in the distance, while his empire bent under the weight of paranoia and vice. Tiberius died in 37 AD, leaving behind a legacy of shadows, proof that sometimes the most frightening emperors are not the loudest, but the most silent. His withdrawal from Rome did not create peace. It created a vacuum filled with fear, cruelty, and whispers of unspeakable habits. If Tiberius turned Capri into a nightmare, imagine Vitellius, who transformed Rome itself into one endless banquet table. Vitellius ruled for less than a single year in 69 AD, a period known as the Year of the Four Emperors. Yet despite his short reign, he earned a reputation that disgusted Romans for generations. If Caligula was mad, Nero theatrical, and Tiberius secretive, Vitellius was something simpler and perhaps more grotesque. He was a glutton without shame. His appetite became his empire, and the throne of Rome his banquet chair. From the moment he arrived in Rome, Vitellius plunged the treasury into ruin with his endless feasts. Historical accounts describe banquets that lasted all day and night, where hundreds of exotic dishes were laid before him. Eels drowned in rare sauces, flamingo tongues, peacock brains, foods gathered from the corners of the empire to satisfy one man's bottomless stomach. Guests often left horrified, not entertained, as Vitellius consumed until he could barely move, only to repeat the ritual the next day. His obsession with food became symbolic of his political corruption. Rome's wealth, already strained by civil war, was squandered on luxuries that fed only his belly. Soldiers were bribed with feasts instead of coin, while common citizens starved. To many Romans, Vitellius embodied the idea that their empire's grandeur was rotting from within, devoured by greed and appetite. Even his death reflected his grotesque lifestyle. When his enemies captured him later in 69 AD, Vitellius was dragged through the streets, mocked for his gluttony, and executed in brutal fashion. His reign had lasted only 8 months, but his legacy endured as a warning. When a ruler lives only to indulge, the empire itself begins to decay. Vitellius remains remembered not for conquest, wisdom, or law, but for his stomach. His habits were not just personal, they became a symbol of Rome's vulnerability, a sign that emperors could warp the empire not only with cruelty or madness, but with something as simple and disgusting as endless hunger. If Vitellius could nearly eat Rome into ruin, wait until you hear about Commodus, who thought he was a gladiator. Commodus, the son of Marcus Aurelius, should have been the model of a philosopher king. Instead, he became one of Rome's most repulsive rulers, remembered less for wisdom and more for vanity, cruelty, and an obsession with playing gladiator. Born in 161 AD and taking power in 180, Commodus transformed the empire into a stage for his delusions, where he alone was the star. Unlike his father, who valued discipline and philosophy, Commodus preferred the roar of the Colosseum. He appeared in the arena dressed as Hercules, wielding a club, and demanded that Rome treat him as the living embodiment of the demigod. But his contests were not true battles. Commodus often fought against terrified gladiators forced to lose, or against wild animals that had already been weakened. He slaughtered them with theatrical cruelty, then basked in applause that was more fearful than genuine. His grotesque habits stretched beyond the arena. Commodus, renamed months after his own titles, had statues built of himself as Hercules and demanded worship as a god. Senators were humiliated, rivals executed, and Rome's administration left in chaos as the emperor spent more time in costume than in government. His vanity was so consuming that he believed the empire itself was merely an extension of his ego. Commodus's reign showed how personal madness could infect the state. His delusions drained the treasury, weakened the Senate, and undermined Rome's stability. Eventually, even his closest advisors could no longer tolerate his self-obsession. In 192 AD, he was assassinated in a conspiracy that ended with a wrestler strangling the so-called gladiator emperor. His death closed a chapter of absurdity and opened the bloody Year of the Five Emperors. Commodus is remembered not for victories or reforms, but for turning the dignity of the empire into a circus. His habits reveal how grotesque it becomes when the most powerful man in the world believes he is nothing more than an entertainer. And if Commodus made Rome a stage for his ego, Elagabalus turned it into a theater of obscene excess. If Commodus turned Rome into his stage, Elagabalus transformed it into a carnival of obscenity. Ascending to power at only 14 in 218 AD, he shocked even a city already desensitized to extravagance. His reign was not about governing or strengthening the empire, it was about indulging every desire, no matter how grotesque, and forcing Rome to watch. Elagabalus's passions centered on shocking displays of wealth and sexuality. He married multiple times, including to a Vestal virgin, violating one of Rome's most sacred traditions. Rumors swirled that he offered himself in public brothels, disguising his identity and paying patrons to treat him as a common harlot. Ancient writers even claim he sought surgeons to alter his body, desperate to embody the role of a woman. For the Romans, who valued tradition and dignity, these habits seemed not only obscene, but dangerous to the stability of the state. His banquets became infamous for their cruelty as well as their extravagance. Guests were sometimes smothered with rose petals that rained from hidden ceilings, while others were served feasts so bizarre they bordered on mockery. Exotic dishes, rare animals, and absurd decorations turned meals into spectacles of humiliation. For Elagabalus, pleasure and cruelty were inseparable. Religion, too, became his playground. As high priest of the Syrian sun god Elagabal, he forced Rome to accept foreign rituals, parading sacred stones through the city while neglecting its own traditions. The Senate was horrified, the people bewildered, and the empire strained under his relentless assaults on custom. By the time Elagabalus was assassinated in 222 AD, dragged through the streets and dumped in the Tiber, his reputation as one of Rome's most repulsive rulers was sealed. He had warped the empire not through conquest or cruelty alone, but by transforming its sacred institutions into stages for his obscene theatre. If Elagabalus drowned Rome in petals and scandal, Caracalla would soak it in blood and cold brutality. Caracalla, born in 188 AD as the son of Septimius Severus, is remembered not for wisdom or innovation, but for his cruelty and paranoia. From the moment he took power in 198 AD, his rule was marked by violence, treachery, and habits that bled Rome both literally and financially. If Elagabalus drowned the empire in petals, Caracalla drowned it in blood. One of his earliest and most grotesque acts was fratricide. When his father died in 211 AD, Caracalla shared the throne with his brother Geta. The experiment lasted less than a year. Unable to tolerate sharing power, Caracalla ordered Geta's murder, slaughtering him in their mother's arms and massacring thousands of Geta's supporters in a purge that horrified Rome. The message was clear: Caracalla's empire had no room for rivals, family or not. His brutality extended to the people themselves. In Alexandria, after citizens mocked him with satirical plays, Caracalla lured the city's leaders into a meeting and ordered their massacre. Tens of thousands were killed in what became one of the bloodiest episodes of his reign. To Caracalla, cruelty was not only a weapon, but a habit, a way to command fear when respect had been lost. Yet he also indulged in grand projects that masked his violence with luxury. His baths of Caracalla were among the largest in Rome, sprawling complexes filled with marble, mosaics, and heated pools. But behind their beauty lay hypocrisy. They were built with funds drained from oppressive taxes and military campaigns. Even generosity under Caracalla came at the price of suffering. In 217 AD, Caracalla's reign ended as violently as it had begun. Stabbed by a disgruntled soldier while on campaign, he left behind a legacy soaked in betrayal and bloodlust. His grotesque habits, murder, paranoia, and excess, did not strengthen Rome. They weakened it, leaving scars on the empire that would last for generations. And if Caracalla's brutality marked the climax of our story, just wait for the conclusion, where we gather the empire's filthiest secrets together. Across centuries, Rome was shaped not only by legions, laws, and monuments, but also by the grotesque habits of its emperors. From Caligula's madness to Nero's theatrical cruelty, from Tiberius's hidden vices to Vitellius's endless banquets, the empire's rulers often revealed the ugliest side of human nature. Commodus played at being a gladiator, Elagabalus drowned Rome in scandal, and Caracalla left trails of blood. Even those we touched upon only briefly, Domitian, Hadrian, Septimius Severus, and Maximinus Thrax, left their own marks of paranoia, obsession, and corruption. What unites them is not just their power, but the way their personal excesses warped an empire. Rome was not destroyed in a single day. It was weakened from within, scarred by the habits of men who treated the world's greatest empire as their personal stage. Yet their stories endure because they remind us of a timeless truth. Unchecked power does not create gods, it creates monsters. Behind the marble statues and triumphal arches lies a history dripping with excess, cruelty, and vanity. And perhaps the most chilling lesson of all is this: Rome's emperors were not so different from us, only far more dangerous.